The night air was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps deep into your bones and makes everything feel heavier, more hopeless. In the shadows of a deteriorating suburban home, with peeling paint and overgrown weeds, a small, trembling puppy sat curled tightly beside the back porch, his thin fur doing little to shield him from the chill. His name, though he barely recognized it anymore, was Lucky. But luck had never been on his side. Lucky was no more than 4 months old, his limbs still slightly too big for his body, his ears floppy, and his eyes round and deep brown, filled with a quiet sorrow that no creature so young should ever carry. He had been born in that very house, in the cluttered basement on a pile of old towels, the result of an unplanned litter from a mother dog that had disappeared not long after giving birth. From the beginning, Lucky's existence had been nothing more than a mistake to the man who lived there. The man, Eric, had a temper that struck like a match, fast and dangerous. Every slam of a door, every crash of a bottle, every thunderous footstep sent Lucky skittering into the corners, his heart pounding like a drum inside his tiny chest. There were no gentle hands or kind words in that house, only shouting, kicks that came without warning, and a darkness that never lifted. Lucky had learned early on how to be quiet, how to be invisible. He tiptoed around the house, avoiding eye contact and praying each day that he wouldn't be noticed. When he did draw attention, accidentally knocking over a can, barking at the wrong moment, or simply existing in the wrong place, punishment followed swiftly and cruelly. A boot to the ribs, a hand around the neck, a day without food. The bruises didn't show on his golden fur, but they lived deep within his spirit. Tonight had been worse than usual. It started with a broken lamp. Lucky didn't even break it, but he was nearby when Eric stumbled in, drunk and furious after losing money at a local bar. The lamp was the final straw. Eric's rage exploded like a bomb. He grabbed Lucky by the scruff and hurled him across the living room, the puppy slamming into the wall with a yelp that echoed off the hollow, nicotine-stained walls. Dazed and gasping, Lucky scrambled behind the torn couch, whimpering. But Eric wasn't finished. He stormed after him, boot kicking at the fabric, growling curses, fists clenched. In a blind panic, Lucky darted out and ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to go. He saw the back door cracked open, the latch broken from years of neglect, and like a breath of fate, he dove for it. The cold air hit him like ice, but he didn't stop. His little paws carried him across the backyard and under a rusted chain-link fence, scraping his belly but buying him freedom. He ran for blocks, never looking back. The streets were dark, slick, with melting frost and completely unfamiliar. Lights from nearby houses glowed softly in windows where families gathered, people laughing, eating, living normal lives. Lucky didn't know what that kind of life felt like. All he knew was the ache in his ribs, the cold slicing through his skin, and the gnawing hunger that had been with him for days. Eventually, his legs began to wobble, the adrenaline fading. He crawled beneath a bush near a neighborhood park, panting, heavily. His breath came in white puffs. He could still hear Eric's shouts in his head, still feel the sting of the wall against his back. The bush provided little warmth, but it was safer than where he'd come from. Lucky curled into a ball, his nose tucked beneath his tail, eyes barely staying open. In the silence, tears welled in the corners of his eyes. Not that he understood what they were, just a deep, aching sadness that leaked out without permission. He was tired. So tired. And the idea of closing his eyes and not waking up didn't seem so bad. But the world wasn't done with him yet. From the park across the street, faint music played from a house with Christmas lights still up, even though the holiday had long passed. A young woman's voice sang softly along. Inside that house, warmth glowed and a kind of magic lingered in the air. That house belonged to a woman named Marley. Marley was a veterinary student who lived alone in the small rental home. She had a heart for animals and a soul full of softness, but she also carried her own scars, some visible, some not. Her childhood hadn't been perfect either, but animals had always been her salvation. She understood the kind of pain that didn't always have words, and tomorrow fate would pull Lucky right into her path. For now, though, the night was quiet, and the stars blinked above him like distant friends he could never touch. Lucky whimpered, once more shifting his weight to keep from freezing. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His paws were scraped raw, his eye was swollen from the earlier attack. But for the first time in his life, there were no fists, no screaming, no violence. Only the cold, the dark, and the distant sound of a lullaby sung from a window. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't even know if he'd make it to morning. But he had escaped. That small act of bravery, that leap through the cracked door, was the beginning of something neither he nor Marley could ever have expected. And the universe, well, sometimes it has a way of placing broken souls exactly where they need to be. Morning came slowly, with the first rays of sunlight breaking through the pale clouds like hesitant fingers reaching across the sky. A faint mist hovered over the ground, clinging to the blades of grass and the leaves of the bush where Lucky lay. He hadn't slept much. His tiny body shivered through the night, his eyes flickering open at every sound. He was weak, both from cold and hunger, and his legs trembled whenever he tried to move. But still, he had survived. The neighborhood was beginning to wake. Cars hummed down the road and porch lights flickered off one by one. Children bundled in jackets walked past the park on their way to school, their voices light and carefree. Lucky stayed hidden under the bush, watching them with quiet curiosity and fear. He didn't know these sounds. He didn't understand laughter. It was a strange symphony that made his ears twitch and his heart beat a little faster. Across the street in the little blue house with the faded white trim, Marley was pouring her coffee. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hair still tied, up in a messy bun from the night before. Her eyes were bleary with sleep, but there was warmth in them, a kind of gentleness that came from years of compassion and study. Marley had chosen veterinary medicine not just as a career, but as a calling. Healing animals wasn't something she did. It was who she was. She moved to the front window, sipping her coffee as she scanned the quiet street. Her gaze drifted to the park across the road. Something caught her eye. At first it looked like a pile of leaves or trash tucked beneath the bush, but then it shifted, just slightly, and Marley's brows furrowed. She squinted, pressing her palm to the glass for a clearer view. Was that a puppy? She placed her coffee down and hurried to the door, grabbing her oversized sweater and slipping on her sneakers. The cold air nipped at her skin as she crossed the street quickly, heart already thumping with concern. As she neared the bush, she crouched slowly, not wanting to frighten the creature that might be hiding. "Hey there, buddy," she called softly, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." Lucky heard the footsteps and shrank back deeper into the bush. His body was so weak that even trembling was difficult now. He tried to growl, but it came out as a pathetic whimper. He didn't trust people. He had no reason to. All he knew of humans was pain, anger, and coldness. But Marley stayed still, her hand gently extended, her eyes filled with compassion. Then she saw his face clearly for the first time, one eye swollen, fur matted, tiny ribs poking through his skin. Her breath caught in her throat. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, tears welling in her eyes. "What happened to you?" Lucky didn't understand the words, but the tone was different. Not harsh, not threatening, just soft. He looked at her hand, trembling, unsure. The familiar instinct screamed at him to flee, but he couldn't run anymore. He didn't have the strength. So instead, for the first time in his life, he didn't pull away. Marley moved carefully, inch by inch, until she was close enough to scoop him into her arms. He flinched at the touch, body stiff and fearful, but she didn't hurt him. Instead, he felt warmth, real warmth, for the first time in days. Her sweater wrapped around him, her arms gentle, cradling him like something precious instead of something broken. "It's okay," she whispered, voice cracking as she held him close. "You're safe now. I've got you." She turned and hurried, back to her house, her heart pounding, already planning what she needed to do. Inside, she laid Lucky down on a soft towel in the living room and turned up the heat. He looked around with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar smells and sounds of her cozy home. A soft couch, a flickering candle, gentle music playing from the kitchen. It was like stepping into another world. Marley knelt beside him and carefully examined his injuries. Her fingers moved with practiced care, but her heart broke with every new bruise she discovered. The swelling around his eye, the faint but telling fracture in one of his ribs, the raw pads of his paws, and worst of all, the look in his eyes, like he was just waiting for her to turn cruel. No puppy should ever have to look that way, she whispered to herself, brushing his fur with her fingers. Not ever. She wrapped him in a warm blanket and made a call to the local vet clinic where she interned. They would need to see him today. Marley wasn't his official owner, yet, but she would take responsibility. She would do whatever it took to make sure he never had to feel fear again. As Lucky lay in the towel, his eyes slowly began to close. The warmth of the room, the softness beneath him, and the strange but comforting scent of the woman beside him lulled him into a fragile sleep. He didn't dream of dark basements or fists. For once, his little mind drifted into something softer, an echo of his mother's warmth, a whisper of what peace might feel like. Marley sat beside him for a long, while watching the rise and fall of his chest, her own eyes filled with emotion. She didn't know where he'd come from, but she could guess, and whoever had done this, whoever had let this tiny soul suffer, had no idea what they had thrown away. Later that afternoon, Marley took Lucky to the vet clinic. He was so quiet in her arms, not because he trusted yet, but because he didn't know what to expect. X-rays confirmed her suspicions: fractured rib, signs of malnutrition, and multiple bruises that told a story without needing words. The vet gently placed a hand on Lucky's head. "He's been through a lot," the vet said somberly. "But with care, he'll recover." Marley nodded, her jaw clenched, tears threatening to spill again. "He's not going back to wherever he came from. I won't let him." She brought him back home with medications, special food, and a heart full of resolve. That night, Lucky slept on a cushion beside her bed, still too nervous to cuddle, but not as tense as before. Marley stayed up late studying, occasionally glancing down to check on him. And once, just once, when the house was still and quiet, Lucky lifted his head and looked at her. She looked back and smiled. And in that moment, something began to shift. A thread of connection, the tiniest flicker of trust, the beginning of healing had begun. The first week in Marley's home passed slowly for Lucky, each day unfolding like a cautious page turned in a book he'd never imagined reading. His body, though still fragile, had begun to mend. The bruises that once stood out like angry splotches on his thin frame faded into softer, yellowed patches. The swelling around his eye went down and he could finally look around without squinting. But the wounds on his heart, that was another matter entirely. Marley knew healing wouldn't be immediate. She had seen this kind of fear before, the kind that burrowed deep into the soul and didn't let go easily. She didn't push Lucky. Instead, she gave him space. She let him set the pace. Her home became a sanctuary of gentle silence, with soft music playing in the background, the scent of lavender drifting in the air, and every movement carried out with patience and purpose. In the mornings, she placed a bowl of fresh food and water beside his cushion. At first, he only nibbled cautiously, his eyes darting around as if expecting the kindness to disappear with the blink of an eye. But when nothing bad happened, when no loud voices came, no heavy boots thundered toward him, he started eating more. One morning, she noticed he'd finished the entire bowl. It was a small victory, but to Marley, it felt monumental. She left. Toys nearby, plush animals, squeaky bones, soft ropes. But Lucky didn't know what to do with them. He sniffed at them occasionally, but mostly ignored them. His life before this had never included play. There were no joyful moments for him to draw from. Joy was a foreign language, and Lucky had never been taught the words. The first time he made a sound other than a whimper was on the fourth night. A soft, low whine escaped him in his sleep, paws twitching as if he were dreaming. Marley rushed over, kneeling beside his cushion. her hand hovering gently over his back. "Shh. It's okay, Lucky," she whispered. "You're safe now. You're not there anymore." The name had come to her unexpectedly. She wasn't sure why she chose Lucky at first. Maybe it was ironic, or maybe it was hopeful. But every time she said it, it felt more right. Like she was naming not who he'd been, but who he could become. One afternoon after returning from class, Marley found Lucky not on his cushion, but under the table. His ears perked up when she walked in, but he didn't bolt. She knelt down slowly, placing her backpack on the floor. "Hey, there you are," she said gently. "You exploring?" His eyes flicked toward her, then back to the floor. But he didn't run. That was progress. "Was thinking we could try something today," she continued, her voice light and warm. "Just a short walk, only if you're ready." The vet had advised her to wait until Lucky seemed physically stable, and Marley had watched closely for days. Now he seemed strong enough to stand and move without trembling. But emotionally, that was a different kind of strength. She reached for the little blue harness she'd bought. At the sight of it, Lucky backed up slightly, his tail tucking in. Marley froze, lowering it. "It's okay," she said softly. "We don't have to. Not yet." She set the harness gently beside her and backed away. She knew from her studies that pushing a traumatized animal could cause setbacks. But later that evening, when she placed it near his cushion again, Lucky didn't shy away. Instead, he sniffed it, touched it lightly with his nose, then curled beside it, not ready, but not afraid anymore. That night, Marley sat beside him, on the floor with a cup of tea, a book in her hand, and silence between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost companionable. Lucky watched her from the corner of his eye as she read aloud. Not for him, not intentionally, but as though he were part of the world now, part of the story. By the end of the week, something had shifted. One morning, as Marley sat cross-legged, on the floor eating cereal, she felt something nudge against her foot. She looked down and nearly dropped her spoon. Lucky was there, cautiously pressing his nose to her sock, sniffing. "Hey," she breathed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Hey, buddy?" She didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She let him explore. And when he slowly, nervously sat beside her, she bit her lip to keep from crying. She offered a piece of cereal in the palm of her hand. He sniffed it, looked up at her, and then, gently, took it. Marley didn't sleep that night, not because of stress or fear, but because she couldn't stop smiling. The next few days became a routine. She left the harness nearby every morning, and each time Lucky inched a little closer to it. Finally, one sunny afternoon, as she knelt with it again, he didn't back away. He let her gently slip it over his small frame, her hands trembling, with care. "You're doing so good, Lucky," she whispered. "Let's go outside, just for a little." He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He followed her to the front door like a shadow testing the light. The walk was short, just to the end of the driveway and back, but to Marley, it felt like walking 1,000 miles into something new. Lucky sniffed the grass, the air, the world, curious, cautious, but not paralyzed anymore. A bird flew overhead and he tilted his head. A car rumbled past, and he stepped closer to her leg but didn't panic. When they returned inside, he looked up at her with those wide brown eyes. For the first time, they didn't seem guarded. They held something new, uncertainty still, but also a fragile kind of trust. Marley sank onto the floor, and Lucky lay beside her. His head rested near her knee. She didn't touch him. She just sat there, her heart full, her soul aching with something she couldn't quite describe. He was healing. And slowly, silently, a bond had begun to form. Not forced, not demanded, but earned. They were two souls quietly learning each other's language. She, the girl with too much heart and not enough answers. He, the puppy who had known only pain but was beginning to discover that maybe not all humans were cruel. Maybe, just maybe, Love could find you even when you didn't know how to look for it. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains, casting golden stripes across the floorboards. Marley was already awake, sitting on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, sipping coffee from a chipped mug with daisies on it. Lucky was, curled up at the foot of the couch, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He looked peaceful now, a quiet contrast to the quivering bundle of nerves he had been just weeks ago. His fur had started to regain its sheen, and the deep scratches along his hind legs had healed into thin, pink lines. Yet it was his eyes that revealed the true progress. No longer haunted, but slowly becoming curious. Marley had begun talking. To him more, narrating her mornings, reading her textbooks aloud, even singing softly under her breath. She didn't expect Lucky to understand the words. What mattered was the tone, the constancy, the kindness. It was the opposite of what he had known before, and slowly he had begun to respond. That Saturday, as she poured fresh water into his bowl and toasted a slice of bread, Marley made a decision. "I think we're ready for the park today," she said aloud, glancing toward Lucky, who sat quietly watching her, head tilted slightly. "Not too far, just a visit. It's warm out and you've been doing so well, little guy." Lucky blinked, then yawned, showing a tiny pink tongue. He didn't bolt or hide, his usual response when something new loomed. That alone was a sign. After breakfast, Marley knelt with the harness, letting Lucky sniff it as always. He didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned into her hand when she gently adjusted the strap around his chest. Her heart swelled. "Look at you," she whispered. "So brave." They made their way outside, the leash held loose in Marley's hand. Lucky's ears twitched at the morning sounds, birds singing, leaves rustling, children laughing somewhere in the distance, but he kept walking. He stayed close to her leg, but not because of fear. It felt more like a connection. The park was only 2 blocks away, a quiet neighborhood space with worn benches, a narrow walking trail, and a small grassy clearing framed by trees. When they arrived, Marley guided Lucky to a shaded area beneath an old oak tree and sat cross-legged on the grass. Lucky sniffed the ground tentatively, circling her once before settling just inches from her knee. Around them, the world moved, gently. A man tossed a frisbee to his golden retriever nearby. 2 toddlers squealed in delight as bubbles floated past. A jogger passed with a nod and a smile. Lucky's eyes flicked from movement to movement, not in panic, but in wonder. Marley laid a soft blanket beside her and pulled out a small container of treats. "You've earned this, buddy," she said. She held out a piece and Lucky took it carefully from her fingers. Then he wagged his tail. Just once, a tiny, uncertain motion as if his body was trying to remember what joy felt like. It brought tears to Marley's eyes. Over the next hour, they sat quietly. Occasionally, Lucky would get up, walk a few feet, sniff the air, then return. When a group of teenagers passed on skateboards, he tensed and moved closer to Marley, but he didn't shake. She placed a gentle hand near his side without forcing contact. He leaned against her. "Yeah, I get it," she murmured. "The world's loud sometimes, but you're doing so great." A little girl with braids and a juice box approached hesitantly. She pointed at Lucky. "Can I pet him?" Marley smiled kindly. "He's a bit shy. Maybe just hold your hand out first." The girl crouched down, extending her fingers. Lucky sniffed them, then retreated a step, but he didn't bark or hide. The girl grinned. "He's cute." "His name is Lucky," Marley said. The girl nodded solemnly. "He looks like he needs extra love." "He does," Marley replied, "but he's finding it." When the girl skipped back to her mother, Marley turned to Lucky and whispered, "You were so brave, little guy." The sun had shifted higher by the time they stood to leave. Marley brushed grass from her jeans and glanced down to find Lucky already looking up at her, as if asking, "What's next?" The walk home was slower, not because of fear, but because Lucky paused to sniff every bush, every lamppost, every drifting leaf. He was exploring now, not just surviving. Back at the apartment, Marley placed a bowl of water on the floor. and Lucky lapped it up eagerly. Then he did something new. He walked to her side, rested his chin gently on her foot, and sighed. Marley stilled, the touch so soft and intentional that it filled her chest with warmth. "You're starting to trust, huh?" she said softly. "Me too." Later that evening, Marley sat on her tiny balcony with a blanket draped over her legs and Lucky curled up beside her. The city was alive with distant hums, but in their little corner of the world, everything was still. She looked at the stars and thought about the journey they had taken so far. Lucky, once a broken puppy trembling in the rain, had made it to this moment, and while the road ahead would still have its shadows, flickers of memory, sounds that might bring back fear, he was no longer alone. Neither was Marley. She had taken in Lucky with the intention to help him heal, never realizing how much she needed healing too. Her past had been quieter, but not without scars. Grief, loneliness, the ache of a childhood spent trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Loving Lucky had given her purpose. Watching him learn to trust had reminded her what courage looked like. As she sat there, she imagined the old version of Lucky, trapped behind a gate, eyes filled with terror, longing for escape, and then looked at the puppy beside her now. Sleeping, safe, loved. A soft breeze danced through the air, and Marley smiled. "We found each other," she whispered, and that was the unexpected part. Lucky stirred, stretched, and let out a sleepy sigh. They were healing together, and even though Marley didn't know what the next chapter held, one thing was certain: neither of them would have to face it alone. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new season of life, slow, warm, and brimming with small, precious milestones. Marley found herself smiling more, laughing without realizing, speaking to Lucky as if he were a roommate instead of a dog. He had come so far from that broken, trembling creature she had first seen cowering beneath a trash bin. Now, he had begun to wag his tail when she walked in the room. He greeted her with little hops and twitches of his ears, tail thumping the floor with growing confidence. Every time he leaned into her hand or lay beside her, she could feel the walls he'd built start to fall away. Still, there were moments, like shadows that briefly darkened the light, when fear crept in. A thunderclap would make him bolt under the bed. Sudden movements or loud voices on the television could send him pacing nervously. But these instances were no longer the foundation of his world. They were fleeting echoes, and Marley stood by, him through everyone. She began to take Lucky on longer walks, through different streets, past new faces and friendly dogs. He would pause sometimes, uncertain, but Marley always waited. She never pulled, she never forced, and that freedom, the ability to choose, was changing him in a way nothing else could. One morning, as they returned from a walk, the apartment manager, Mr. Patel, a kind man in his 60s, waved them over. "That dog of yours," he said with a smile. "He's come a long way." Marley beamed, proud beyond words. "He really has." "You thinking of keeping him?" She hesitated, only for a moment. Technically, Lucky was still a foster. The rescue group had been patient, checking in every now and then. They had listed him on their website with a note that he needed a very special home. But with each passing day, Marley knew, deep in her bones, that home was already here. "I think he's already chosen me," she said. Mr. Patel chuckled. "Looks like you both got lucky." Later that evening, Marley sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop open, the foster paperwork pulled up. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The rescue group had sent her the adoption form weeks ago, but she hadn't filled it out. Part of her afraid to hope too soon, afraid to attach labels to something so fragile. But as Lucky sat beside her chair, gently resting his head against her leg, she made her decision. She typed in her name, her details, answered every question with honesty, and hit submit. It felt like a vow. And it was. The official call came 2 days later. "We're so happy for both of you," the woman from the rescue said. "Honestly, we couldn't imagine a better home for Lucky." Marley's eyes welled up. "Thank you. He's not just a dog to me. He's He saved me too." After hanging up, Marley dropped to her knees and hugged Lucky, burying her face into his fur. He licked her cheek and gave a soft whine, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "You're mine now," she whispered, "and I'm yours, forever." To celebrate, Marley took Lucky to the pet store for the very first time. At the door, he hesitated. So many smells, so many people, but with her gentle encouragement, he walked in. Marley knelt by his side the entire time, letting him sniff every aisle. They picked out a plush duck toy, a new bed, and a collar that read Lucky in bold silver letters. The employee who checked them out smiled warmly. "First big outing?" Marley nodded. "He's come a long way." Lucky sat beside her, calm and alert, the duck toy clutched proudly in his mouth. That night, she placed the new bed next to her own. Lucky sniffed it, circled twice, and lay down with a content sigh. Marley reached down and brushed his ears, heart full to bursting. This home, once filled with silence and solitude, now pulsed with a quiet, steady love. Weeks turned into months, and with each sunrise, Lucky's spirit bloomed. He began playing with other dogs at the park, cautiously at first, then with giddy abandon. His favorite game became chasing falling leaves. On rainy days, instead of hiding, he would curl beside Marley on the couch, content just to be near her. Every meal was greeted with a happy dance. Every nap was taken in the sunlight pouring through the windows. One afternoon, while studying for her final exams, Marley looked up from her notes to find Lucky sitting at the balcony door staring out. She joined him, kneeling beside him as he gazed at the sky. "You ever think about where you came from?" she asked softly. He didn't move, but the way his body leaned into hers was answer enough. "You don't have to anymore," she whispered. "This is your life now, safe, loved, forever." That weekend, Marley hosted a small gathering, her first since moving in. Just a few friends, some homemade snacks, soft music in the background. She worried how Lucky might react, but he surprised her again. He greeted each guest with cautious curiosity, accepted treats, and even let one friend rub his belly. "Is this the same dog you told us about?" her friend Jenna asked, amazed. Marley smiled, watching Lucky roll onto his side, tail wagging. "Yeah, this is him, just healed." The moment became a symbol of how far they'd both come. Later that night, after everyone had left and the apartment was quiet once more, Marley sat on the couch with Lucky sprawled across her lap. She stroked his back gently, tears of joy slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't rescue you," she said through a smile. "We rescued each other." Lucky stirred, gave a sleepy huff, and snuggled closer. Months ago, he had been a terrified pup left to survive in a world that had shown him only cruelty. But now he was loved, truly, deeply loved. And the place where he found that love, it wasn't grand or glamorous. It was a tiny apartment with worn floorboards, chipped mugs, and one fiercely compassionate soul who saw past his fear and into his heart. Marley didn't have much, no riches, no big backyard, no fancy lifestyle. But what she did have, she gave freely: patience, safety, warmth. And that had made all the difference. Their journey had begun with pain, but it bloomed into something beautiful: an unexpected love, a second chance, a forever home. And for Lucky, that was more than enough. If Lucky's journey touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. Every act of kindness matters, and maybe, just maybe, love can be found in the most unexpected place. With love from your city name,